Imagine if God allowed you to create your own game. Which team would you prefer to be on? A mysterious woman with a badge appears in front of us. According to her, she would like to get into her team the one who was the strongest at all times. Events began to develop on the cargo pier. 6 men stand opposite each other. At the head of one of the groups is a man in red with a small suitcase. As they looked at each other, the man in red took out his small suitcase and showed its contents. The second man, with a smile on his face, ordered his guys to show the product to the dude in red so that he could evaluate it. While the guy in red was looking at the goods, he told him that if he took everything, he would also get bullets in addition. The man in red already agreed and decided to take everything, but before he could agree on this deal, something strange happened. They heard a loud sound and turned around to see how the guy standing on guard fell from a strong blow from people unknown to them. Everyone was in shock. The guy in red got scared and started screaming that the second guy told him that this was the safest place for transactions. A counter-terrorism assault squad came to them. One guy from this squad struck a man standing on guard like Jackie Chan. The guy from the squad rushed from side to side at breakneck speed while the terrorists were shooting at him. He was not alone. Realizing this, everyone panicked and increased the fire on him. All they could hear were screams about how to kill every single one of them. A guy from the counter-terrorism squad from above threw an unknown grenade to people from the top. No one understood until it started to glow. One of those terrorists shouted that it was a flash noise grenade, but it was too late. It began to glow and blind everyone around. They were all blinded and screaming, clutching their eyes until a member of that detachment, unknown to us, jumped down and flew at them. He sharply raised his hand and strange diodes were glowing in his palms. He flew at them as if he imagined himself to be Tony Stark. One of the terrorists only had time to curse and ask who the hell this was when he received a powerful blow to the face from an electric discharge. The other terrorist managed to come to his senses and point his weapon at them, shouting that he would deal with them all but did not have time. While he was thinking, another member of the squad appeared from behind him out of nowhere and was followed by a strong blow to the back. All the terrorists were already lying down. It turned out that their squad was larger than we thought. One of them addressed the other as a captain and said that all the opponents inside had been neutralized. A dialogue began between the captain and another member of the squad. He said that their goal was moving upward, and the captain assured that there were their people all around. It seems their target was the man in red, but he and his boys tried to escape along the deck of the cargo ship. He was unable to escape far. A counter-terrorist squad appeared right in front of him. He was surrounded, and one of the squad members ordered him to drop his weapon. The guys who were with the man in red immediately surrendered. They raised their weapons and begged them not to shoot at them, because they were not resisting and would not. That man turned sharply to the captain, saying that they had met so many times over the past 2 years, and now again he fell into his clutches. Taking off his mask, the captain of the detachment turned to the man in red with the words to discard all thoughts about the resistance introduced on all sides. The captain of the counter-terrorist squad turned out to be a young guy named Zhou Xiang. The man in red, as if nothing had happened, began to take off his hat, saying that it seemed time to return to heaven. Everyone was in bewilderment. Someone from the squad shouted at him to stop immediately while he was taking off his jacket, but only the captain began to understand what was happening. Having taken off his clothes, a bomb was attached to the man, and with screams, "Let him lead you to a world of happiness, where there are no worries or sorrows," the timer started. Things went on for seconds. The members of the squad pointed their weapons at him, realizing that things were bad and he wanted to send everyone to the next world. There were only a couple of seconds left, and only Captain Zhou Xiang rushed forward headlong to stop him, telling the others to step back. In the last 3 seconds, he managed to run and grab the man and rise into the air while the others shouted after him. They rose higher and higher into the sky, but the timer still stopped and the two of them exploded. That mysterious woman appears again, holding Captain Zhou Xiang in her arms. But now he is in a game of best man to win, and this is his only chance to come back to life. The boy woke up in the middle of the forest. The first thing that came to his mind was that it was just a dream. He didn't understand whether he was still sleeping or not. Getting to his feet and looking around, he saw an incredible landscape, a completely unfamiliar landscape to him. He looked in surprise while thoughts flashed through his head about how real everything looked, but at the same time amazing. His gaze fell on a strange stone on which pieces were carved, just like in Xiangqi Chinese chess. The largest figure on this stone, the general, was illuminated in red, while the other figures below, the horse, bishop, and advisor, also glow. When the guy turned around, behind him there was another huge stone, on which figures from Xiangqi were also carved, but only the general was shining there. The only thing that came to his mind was the memory of that mysterious girl who talked about the game the strongest will win. It's not like this lady wanted to force him to play Xiangqi. Discarding this, he decided that the best solution was to call headquarters, but his call was not answered no matter how much he tried. The Iron Man suit clearly failed him. The communication equipment did not work, but the special purpose night equipment could be used. He grabbed the weapon and fired to the side, but even his electromagnetic gun worked differently from the communication device. Somewhere in his thoughts, the idea appeared that the higher-ups had placed him in a combat simulator again, but he wasn't wearing a helmet. While he stood and thought about everything, the stones standing behind him began to glow. The boy turned and noticed that on one side only both horses were on fire, and on the other side, 4 figures were also burning without changes. He couldn't understand what the figures on both stones were connected to, but still the guy decided to come closer and find out the information, because there was almost no information to draw conclusions. Jo-sung, having finally decided, flew up sharply to find out more information, but his gaze suddenly fell on the statue. Stopping in the air, our boy looked closely at the statue and thought that it might also be part of the game. In front of him is a huge statue of military armor, which clearly could have something to do with the game itself. It is clear that the captain studied very well at school. He is under the thread in his thoughts that this powerful statue with military armor could belong to the warriors of the Qing dynasty. He looked lower and noticed that the pattern in the form of a dragon began to glow. It seemed to him that this statue was a very important prop, and perhaps equally important information was hidden inside it. While smart thoughts were visiting him, he managed to notice how a carved figure cracked on one of the stones. The captain was stunned and confused by what was happening. That piece was a pawn. It split and shattered, and the guy desperately tried to understand why but decided to check another stone. He began to look around and search with his eyes for the answer to everything that was happening, but only noticed that the boat from the other stone was also on fire. The guy was at a loss. I asked him a question about what was happening, but no one could give him an answer, as well as to his question about whether the green gun had broken. Jo-sung began to understand that things were bad since the figure on the other side caught fire, and the 2 figures here completely split. Now it all seemed unimportant to him. At the moment, he only wanted to find out how this statue worked and what it was for. The idea came into his head to touch the lit-up dragon pattern, but this caused a strange reaction from the statue. But that was what he wanted. A strange hieroglyph appeared on the ground around the statue. Everything around was filled with a blinding light. The status began to crack at the seams. Eventually, the statue shattered and broke into pieces, but the captain was upset that nothing more was happening. He expected something more from this. He decided to come closer, and as soon as he stood up and approached the wreckage, someone's massive hand suddenly came out of all this smoke and dust. It flew right into his helmet. His hand grabbed it, but he didn't understand what or who it was. The guy pulled out his weapon, and without thinking what would happen next, pointed it forward at the monster that had crawled out of the smoke and fired. But in the battle against this monster, it was useless. The weapon turned out to be like a toy for the monster, and he easily grabbed and knocked it out of the captain's hands. The monster got even angrier and furiously shouted at the captain that how could he shoot at the regent, and only then did the captain realize that it was not a prop. The captain, without thinking for a long time, remembered his Jackie Chan skills and was able to drive into his neck with his foot, thereby successfully freeing himself from the clutches of the terrible monster. But his triumph did not last long. It only fueled the monster, and the captain received a very powerful blow to the face. The blow was so powerful that the captain flew back exactly a couple of meters. This was such a powerful kick that if not for his parochial nano armor, there would have definitely been internal bleeding. The captain barely got up and gained strength and began to ask the regent to stop and end the fight because they don't know each other at all, and there's no point in just playing with life like that. In response, the regent asked the name of our madman who destroyed the statue and shot at him. The captain, hoping that the regent was not from truly ancient times, began to tell that he was born in the 2050s and his name was Zhou Xiang, also asking what kind of warrior this regent was. Unfortunately, the regent did not understand a single word of our crazy captain and was even more angry that the captain did not know anything about him. The regent began to say that he was the one who had made a huge contribution to the formation of their state. He was the first Bader of Manchuria, and this, in turn, was a title for military merit. The captain was surprised. I'll buy, this is the same hero of Jin Yura's novel notes about the deer and the tripod, the one who was defeated by Little Wei, and how a man from the Qing dynasty ended up here in the first place. He decided to ask the general who brought him there, and whether by chance the mysterious woman he saw after the explosion brought him here. The general was surprised and began to ask whether our boy had dreamed of her, to which the boy was not even surprised and said that he thought so, and that some mysterious force had brought them there. While the general was asking him about the helmet, the captain began to understand what was happening at the same moment when the advisor caught fire. The regent continued to think that it was the captain who moved him to this strange place and began to interrogate what kind of demon he was and how he did it. But the captain confidently replied that it was not him, but the girl from their dreams who sent them there to play a game, and they must be on the same team. And the role of the regent in this game is that of an advisor. The captain continued the story, even though the regent didn't really understand him. He said that when he woke up, only one figure was shining, and if he understood correctly, then he was a general. Loud laughter was heard from behind, and then the captain and regent began to realize that they were far from alone, and that someone was rushing towards them. When they turned around, they saw an unknown man who was already rushing headlong towards them. This madman with a spear rushed headlong on his horse, smiling and shouting to our hero and regent that he had found them. The regent, realizing that the spear was pointed at them, threw our hero aside to take the blow on himself. That horseman at great speed thrust a spear into the regent's chest and passed right through. But the captain flew away from them thanks to the regent. The captain was terrified, he called out to the regent, but there was no point in that. The only thing that was in his head then was the question of who the horseman was, whether it was their enemy. The horseman's eyes were burning like crazy. He raised the spear along with the regent's body, and with the same crazy look told the captain not to worry. He was next. The captain continued to shout at him about who he was and why on earth he was attacking him with the regent. This madman turned out to be General Macha. He asked with a grin and mockery that the captain had not yet understood what was happening now. Choking from his wound, the regent was able to squeeze out the question whether this was the same Macha from the era of the Three Kingdoms. It suddenly dawned on the captain that it was true that someone had gathered people here from different periods of time. Ao Bai from the Qing dynasty, now Ma Chao from the Three Kingdoms. But why did the girl take the captain? In response to Ma Chao's loud words, the regent replied to the captain that whoever he was, be it Ma Chao or Zhang Fei, if we fight like figures from Xiang Yu, then he is probably from the enemy team. The regent continued his monologue that the pain from the edge of the weapon was real, and this was a real battlefield, and then loudly shouted to the captain that Ma Chao was their enemy. The regent's eyes lit up with fire from anger. He was determined to kill Ma Chao. He shouted to the captain that they should unite and kill him. The captain jumped up from his seat and asked Ao Bai to hold on because he would help him now. He simply rushed towards the rider. This only made the horseman laugh. He was glad about it because then he would be able to do the same thing to him as he did to the criminal Cao Chao. Ma Chao led a rebellion against him. The captain did not have time to reach him. Ma Chao grabbed the spear tighter and twisted it with all his might, while it was still in the regent's body. The spear went even deeper and spun with such force that Ao Bai was torn into pieces, while the captain could not really help, and Ma Chao watched him contentedly. As soon as the regent was blown to pieces, Ma Chao turned on our hero and looked at him like prey. He tried to hit the captain with a spear. The captain was able to jump back and the spear passed him, but still Ma Chao threw him into the air and was able to damage his special protective suit. Zhou Xiang barely stood up. His suit was damaged, but he simply did not understand who Ma Chao was. Whether he was human or not, how he could lift Ao Bai with one left hand and then finish him off in a second. His special protective suit was damaged by 42%. If not for the suit, the boy would now be in the next world. Ma Chao looked down at the captain and said with a grin that he was a persistent fellow and was already ready for another attack. It was not there. It dawned on the captain that if Ma Chao is not from this era, then there is only one way to defeat him, to use something that he has never seen. Ma Chao was already rushing to meet the captain, pushing his spear forward with the confidence that he would win this fight. However, Zhou Xiang had already thought through everything and managed to grab the weapon at the last moment and pull the trigger. Ma Chao froze in surprise, not understanding what the boy was holding in his hands. The captain hit the target exactly. The rider and horse were neutralized. The rider was carried a couple of meters back with the help of the guy's charged shot. The boy was lucky that he managed to strike. Otherwise, he would have been the loser and would have become a kebab on a skewer. The seconds that he spent over the horse's body were accompanied by thoughts that who would have thought that even horses would be moved to such a place? Because everything happened so quickly that she also got it. While he was thinking, the horse's body began to gradually disappear before his eyes, which means that those who died in this world simply evaporate like that. Hoarse sounds were heard from behind. Ao Bai was on the verge. The captain suddenly rushed towards him to check how he was and what was wrong with him right now. The boy ran to the decision and tried to figure out how to leave this terrible place, but it seemed the regent would not last that long. He was on the verge of life and death. While the captain is sitting near the regent's body and talking about how in his time they will help find a way to save him, Ma Chao flies out of nowhere from behind. But even in this state, Ao Bai pushed the captain aside and jumped straight to meet Ma Chao to protect his new ally and friend. The captain watched closely to see who, after being wounded by an electric bullet, would be able to get up and fight as Ma Chao did. The regent shouted furiously at Macha. He wanted to see what one of the 5 tigers was capable of. Not everyone could stand up after something like that, respect him as a real warrior. Shouting that he would save him from suffering, he thrust the entire spear straight into the regent, passing right through, thereby tearing him into pieces.
Our hero simply looked at it all because he could not help, and hoped that if this was a game, then the main thing was that nothing happened to Aobai, and maybe then they would win.
It took a couple of seconds for him to come to his senses and take out his weapon to try again, hoping that this would bring the regent back to life. Unfortunately, the captain greatly underestimated Ma Chao's intelligence and cunning, because he already understood what the guy had in his hands and how he used it. Ma Chao thrust his spear straight into the barrel of the captain's pistol, disarming it and almost took off our hero's head. But something suddenly slowed him down. Triumph was so close, but suddenly someone threw a blade at him from the side, which prevented him from dealing with the captain. He was furious at who dared to attack him, especially from the side, but he managed to catch the blade. I wonder what era this man came from. The captain wondered who this daredevil or madman was. A woman's voice was heard in the distance, and a girl was galloping towards them on horseback. She shouted at Ma Chao so that he should not dare touch their general Zhou Xiang. Her name was Mulan. She shouted to them in all seriousness that she wanted to fight Ma Chao. But how soon would we expect the rest of the Disney princesses? Mulan rode so warlike, ready to give her life and protect her general from any danger that might await him. The game takes a different turn. All this time they were under careful surveillance and their every step was recorded by that mysterious woman. The woman stood and watched the game, and behind her stood a man who looked like a mad scientist. He expressed to her his feelings about how difficult it was in the beginning. They watched everything that was happening in the game. The woman asked one of the workers how soon another horse would arrive, but he was already on his way. He had 500 meters left. She was convinced that everyone should be extremely attentive and record their every step and every action. Let's return to the events that take place 3 hours before the start of the game. That woman drives up to the forested mountainous region of Zhongyuan. She was met and asked for an ID for verification. The woman showed her ID and drove further into the game area. It turned out she was a doctor. Her name was Cao. Dr. Cao calmly entered the building and went through facial recognition. She walked in an unknown direction and into some strange room. Having walked into that room, she stopped and looked at the huge test tubes with a grin. Now we can see the whole truth of this game. Grab it because this is your last chance to return to life. These were the words Zhou Xiang heard from Dr. Cao before awakening in the game. It turned out that all the characters in the game were in test tubes, and all this was unreal, but what would have happened if they knew about it? Over the earpiece, Dr. Cao was told that the game was about to start, and she had to go, but she obediently went to follow the process of the game. The entire team of developers and doctors panicked. Some of the participants were not ready, and the game was about to start. At the moment when everything was ready, Dr. Cao came. The man who was most pleased with her was that man who looked like a crazy scientist. His name was Dr. Lu. The game will be launched soon. All departments are in full attention. The countdown begins. The game has started. The consciousness of the general of the red team has already been mixed into the game. The general is already loading. Dr. Cao was bothered by why nothing was happening on the green team's side, because the generals should appear at the same time. They had already launched the game many times, and this problem had not arisen, so one of the employees suggested checking it. Dr. Lu tried to reassure the girl that this was just a small problem, but he did not understand at all what this meant for her. Dr. Cao was very angry, because the result of the experiment and the game can influence the future of humanity, and a small mistake can lead to terrible consequences. Dr. Lu had to agree with the girl and take measures to correct the problem, find out if everything was okay with the participant in the game. The game began to get out of control because the general of the red team began to activate other pieces of the game. In the red team, the advisor has already been activated. Now there are 2 players, and in the green team, even the general will not load. Chao thought about was that for Zhou Xiang, this state of affairs could backfire and cause harm. Finally, the green team general loaded. Most likely it was just a connection error between the player and the game itself. The girl ordered the general to be quickly transferred to the battlefield because 2 of the red team had already activated. The green team's general is already on the battlefield, but the red team's horse has also activated, and the game begins to get out of control. In a panic, the horse of the red team had already been activated, and in the green team only General Dr. Cao ordered to show it. They started to act, but the green team is still very slow, which just greatly worsens their position in the game itself. The guy in the suit reports that, as the girl requested, she was provided with a person from her time for her experiment. Who would have thought that an unforeseen error could occur? You should not act rashly. If you lean in one direction, you can lose your status as a scientist. Dr. Cao apologized that her wishes influenced the experiment. but the players she selected will make you feel a range of emotions, so trust my choice. They continued to monitor the general of the green team. This guy is already checking for weapons and getting comfortable. The girl ordered the man with glasses to immediately activate the horse with the green command. Since a bug had occurred, let the game itself now fix everything. While Jo-sung was getting used to the battlefield, he noticed that now both horses on this side turned green. We are shown a statue standing in the middle of the battlefield. It began to crack and collapse. A new player has awakened. Before us again is that mysterious girl, she tells Mulan, who has just awakened, that she is taking part for the second time, and if she loses again, she will lose the chance to wish. The girl warns that this is her last opportunity, but Mulan insists that this time she will meet all the girl's expectations. Mulan is already on the battlefield. They tell her that their general is about to be discovered by the general of the enemy team, and she needs to quickly return to his aid. Dr. Cow and the man with glasses were watching the game, and the man saw that the green team's horse was heading towards its general. Let's return to the present. Mulan suddenly appeared on the horizon and managed to intervene in the battle and help Zhou Xian. Macha was shocked where she appeared, especially in armor and with weapons. The general and Mulan rode away from the battlefield on horseback. They exchanged a few phrases along the way. He was surprised that she got the horse figure. He kept asking Mulan about how she immediately guessed that he was a general and also realized who the real enemy was. He was surprised at how accurately she understood everything, but then he found out that this was not the first time she had played, and for her it was quite simple. Having driven a little further, they realized that Macha was still chasing them, although he was not catching up with them, but no one understood where he got so much strength from. The general didn't understand where he got the horse from. Their horses don't look like real ones at all. This is a special ability of the horse's figure. Mulan explained to him that if they just wish, they can call a horse to them in any place at any time. But the general was interested in the question of whether all figures have their own characteristics. While they were galloping, they noticed that someone was rushing towards them. Mulan told the general that this was another player, a horse. They rushed past each other, only having time to touch their blades. Now they are finally 3 against 1, more chances. The general managed to look at him out of the corner of his eye, even though they got closer for just a moment. But he was wondering what kind of person could be hiding under such a frightening mask. The masked man was galloping straight towards Macha, and he was sure that he would win, and that it was just another player who had come to meet his certain death. The battle began. Macha did not understand who was hiding behind the mask, but this player had excellent command of the weapon, and could repel any of his attacks. Macha realized that they were almost on par, but he was wondering what kind of strange guy was hiding under the mask. He wanted to know his name. A strange masked man took advantage of the moment that Macha was distracted by something and sharply launched his spear at him. The spear passed exactly over him and missed. Macha was quite scared and managed to dodge his spear, but it turned out not so simple. The next blow did not take long to arrive, until Macha was distracted by that blow. This masked man soared above him and was ready to thrust his sword directly into his head. Macha managed to react and substituted a horse in his place. The poor animal died just like that while Macha tried to defend himself. This distracted the masked man a little, and Macha delivered a strong blow, passing through his mask, but just a little more, and Macha would have died on this field from attacks of that type. They stood opposite each other and looked intently. Macha was ready to clash with him in battle and fight for at least 900 years. But would that strange man dare? He stood silently, as if dumb, just looking directly without answering Macha. But then Mulan and the captain appeared. Mulan threatened Macha to accept death with dignity because there was nowhere else to run. They surrounded him, although Macha had almost finished the game, when suddenly these two horses appeared and did not allow him to deal with the general. They all looked at him when suddenly Mulan said that they were under the supervision of the goddess in this game, and victory would definitely be theirs. But apparently no one knew this except her. Macha was annoyed by this. He said that he was not a coward and they could attack him, and only the skill of a real shinobi would judge who would win and who would lose. Macha was abruptly contacted by a strange guy who told him to come back with information, and he would report on the new arrangement. He was scared. He couldn't understand how His Majesty managed to contact him from 1,000 miles away. That strange man sat surrounded by 2 other warriors and told Macha that he had destroyed the enemy team's advisor, and because of this had gained his special ability. He ordered Macha to return to him because he had his own plan, but Macha did not want to because the enemy general was almost in his hands. No one understood why he stood rooted to the spot, but this was a chance for them to defeat him once and for all. Mulan sharply rushed forward, throwing Zhou Xian off his horse. She wanted to deal with him while he stood rooted to the spot, but he suddenly came to his senses. Both horses rushed at him in the hope of winning, but he abruptly activated the special ability of the advisor's figure and was forced to retreat. Mulan was surprised because this ability of the advisor and Ma Chao to move now, just a little more and they would have defeated him. Zhou Xiang asked them that, apparently, this was not the first time they had come here and wanted them to tell more about this place. The guy in the mask rushed sharply in his direction, which frightened the general. He stood as if he could fight back, but the man rushed past and climbed onto the horse behind the general. Having climbed onto the horse and already moving out for the last time, that dude told Mulan to guard the general and he would go look for the camp. This time they also didn't have time to find out who he was. The girl was upset that this time they came across a strange ally. The general abruptly jumped out of his seat, remembering advisor Ao Bai. He still wanted to help him, but realized that it was too late to help. Mulan came up to show that he was an advisor to our team, and all this is shown on that stone. And if the figure is cracked, it means it was defeated. Zhu Xiang understood how the game worked and thanked General Fa and the other general for saving his life. Mulan was confused why he called her General Fa, but the captain was sure that she was one of the famous historical heroes, General Fa. It turned out that her name really is Mulan, but her last name is not Fa at all. The captain immediately wondered if there really was another famous girl in history, a general named Mulan. The captain decided to bury the regent, but Mulan considered it pointless because when the game ends, everyone will return back, and in a magical land, everything is not real. He was very sorry that the regent had to disappear like that, even if it wasn't for real, but it felt exactly like that. Mulan was surprised that in their time people were so easily moved. The captain looked at Mulan and asked that if he were in his place, she would also throw his corpse here, but she just smiled and called him a fool. Turning to him, she decided to tell him that if the general of the team dies, then everyone else will end. These are the rules of the game. Chusong decided to admit that he still didn't fully understand everything, and perhaps she could tell us more about this game. She decided that the best time to talk about all the rules and what is happening in the game would be while they were playing. While they were walking past stones with figures and talking, the guy in the mask rushed as fast as he could across the bridge to the camp. They rode Mulan's horse and talked. It turned out that if you win the game, you can get a chance to return to life. The captain was surprised because all the players are from different times, after the victory where everyone will return, to ancient times or to the present. But the girl corrected him. After the victory, they will be able to set a wish and thinks they will have to choose it themselves. He began to understand that, based on all the girls' stories, they all got into this game precisely after death in the real world. He was interested in the creator of the game, a person, or as Mulan the goddess put it, for what purpose did they create the game? But Mulan is convinced that people like them cannot understand what is on the minds of the gods, the purpose and what motivates them. She very optimistically said that there was no difference because they were no longer alive anyway. And the captain threw a dissatisfied glance at her, believing that he couldn't try his best without knowing the goal. He was just interested. The girl does not recognize such interest because even if you find out why, you yourself will be able to control your own destiny. In order to return to life, you need to focus on the game. The boy remembered the day of his death and was once again convinced that, as he said, no one could survive near such an explosion. While they were driving, he turned to Mulan because this is the second time she is taking part in the game. He wanted to find out last time everything also took place here or not. But it turned out not. The previous place of the battle was completely different. A long river. The camps were on its banks, and the banks were connected by a large bridge. There were huge towers, and among them there was one taller than all with a ball on top. She started talking and said that the game was just as fierce and it was a pity, because she would have happily explored the surroundings. The captain listened attentively, but asked to talk more about the abilities of the pieces and the roles of the players. She didn't know what to say because last time she was quickly taken out of the game, so she only knows about the abilities of the horse and the advisor. Because that time, she was the advisor. Her loss was not her fault, because their general was absolutely irresponsible and could not keep track properly. The guy was wondering who gave the general that time if they lost so quickly. Mulan said that although he had a big name, he didn't have the patience at all. Their general was the supreme government of Western Chu, Xiang Yu. Western Chu is a principality that Xiang Yu ruled in the 2nd century BC. The captain turned blue when he heard the name and said that Xiang Yu was a great historical figure, known for his military merits. How could he lose with him? Mulan continued to explain that unfortunately it was not their fault. The figures on their side did not have time to awaken, so they were surrounded. Xiang Yu then destroyed both enemy knights, both cannons, 3 pawns, 1 rook, and 1 bishop. I have never seen such a fearless warrior. But in the end, he was seriously wounded, and the enemy general was Yue Fei, probably also a famous general, so our general fell at his hands. The captain now even more did not understand why he was made a general. If the last time was Yue Fei and the supreme ruler Xiang Yu, Mulan did not know about Yue Fei, so she asked whether he was an outstanding general. Outstanding is not enough to say. There is even such an expression that moving mountains is easy. But moving the army of General Yue Fei is difficult. This phrase describes how he led the army. The girl immediately had hearts in her eyes. She added that she didn't know that he was so courageous and hoped that she would have a chance to meet him, and the captain stopped being surprised at the loss. Finally, after a long time, they arrived at the stone statue. The girl immediately said to activate it quickly, in case another mighty warrior refused. We are taken back to the past of a new warrior. In a dream, he lit a lamp and looked at the sword. In a dream, he returned to the fortified camp, where music sounded, as if he wanted to return their lands and earn glory. A picture opens before us. A grandfather stands and admires the city, calling his grandson to come and look at these native lands. Such beautiful rivers and mountains open up to our eyes. It's a pity that the Jinki just appropriated these lands for themselves, fragmenting our state and dividing families. The little boy pointed and asked his grandfather if this was the land of the emperor, but his grandfather told him no. Everything you see in front of you is all the lands of the emperor, no matter what you say. But it all sounds like self-deception, said the old man. The old man began to cry, and the grandson, perplexed, asked why, but the grandfather said he was afraid that he would not live to see that very day, but the boy was not in danger. Without even looking at the boy, he told him that the roots of his generation cannot be cut off. He must remember this shame and serve his homeland with all his heart, like Captain America. Grandfather handed him a sword, saying that from that day on, this whole heavy burden would be on the boy's shoulders. The boy was surprised, and, holding the sword in his hands, he answered the old man that his grandson remembered everything, and will definitely fulfill your will, grandfather. The grandfather added that he must remember, from this day on, the name of the sword embodies your desire for the rest of your life to return the lost lands. In the present, the new player had already awakened holding the same sword in his hands, but he was dumbfounded because he somehow ended up in the game without realizing it. Zhou Xiang immediately introduced himself and said that he was a general from the team. Mulan did the same but asked how to address him. The frightened warrior pointed his sword at them. The general immediately began to explain that they were not his enemies, but members of the same team. But almost immediately he realized that the guy also became a player for the first time. The guy still not understanding where he was, he continued to say that they are not like the inhabitants of the Song Empire. But who are you, Jinky dogs? Mulan got angry and started screaming about who he called dogs. Yes, I am the first female general of the Tang dynasty, but the general quickly reminded her that she herself said that he was there for the first time, and he needed to explain everything well. You have a strange way of speaking, yet you call yourself a general of the Tang dynasty? It seems they will have to slowly put everything in order, said the general, and Mulan hopes that in the future there will be more of those who have already played on their team. While searching for the camp, the masked man found statues of enemies and, until they were activated, destroyed them one by one. The workers watching the game were all surprised at how fast that guy was, and how he managed everything on his own. Behind Dr. Cao praised him, saying that even though he lost last time, he was still incredible and how good it was that he had a chance to participate again. Dr. Cao was told by the workers that now, in accordance with the rules, it is necessary to turn on the fight termination mode. That's all for today. Before the next shift, carefully study the data so that there are no more problems in the game, Dr. Cao said before leaving. She was very worried about Zhou Xian because she had helped him many times and hoped that he would not disappoint her, because this was their promise. The barrier began to rise and the camps were cut off from each other. No one could enter or leave. The general and his team remained near their camp. The general watched in surprise as the barrier separated the two camps. He turned to Mulan and said that she was right about the barrier. The only thing the general was worried about right now was that their horse would not return soon. But Mulan continued to eat calmly, saying that he was dexterous. He also knew how to call a horse and everything would be fine with him. The shocked general turned to Mulan and, watching her calmly eat, told her that their horse remained on enemy territory, and if it was surrounded, then things would be bad. A new player on their team suggested to him that if he really was that worried, he would go to the enemy camp, find him, and bring him back. But the general could not allow them to act alone again, because it was too dangerous for their lives. The guy stood up abruptly and asked the general what their plan of action was. Mulan told us a long time ago about how things are here, let me summarize, and then I'll tell you what we will do, said the general. They are locked in one large place, the area of movement is limited, and at nightfall the entire territory is divided into two parts. Only the generals of both teams can activate the figures. If the stone statue remains untouched, the enemy can easily hack it and then activation is impossible. While Mulan was chewing with her mouth full, she added that I'm afraid one night will not be enough to activate all the players. The guy snapped his fingers, and the guy replied that it means now, during the day, we will avoid battles to find all the other players. Each figure had its own ability. What we now know is that horses can always summon a horse and saddle it, an advisor can teleport to his general, and when you defeat an enemy, you take away his power. The new player told him that if this is so, then they can let their general take over all the forces, because in this case the chance of winning is higher. The general answered him that if you arm the general to the teeth, he will become much stronger, and it will also be easier to defend himself. But it seems to me that the main thing for a general is not to defeat enemies, but to avoid battles. It is better to distribute abilities among all members of the team. I think in this case our attack and defense will become even better, the general continued. After the death of one of the generals, the game will end, and no matter how many players remain on the team that lost the general, it will be considered lost. Mulan excitedly replied that she completely agreed, because last time their entire team lost because the general was taken out of the game. The new player agreed with the words, "No matter how strong the warrior is, one cannot survive against the army." There are also lucky monsters on the territory that brutally attack the player as soon as he is lured, but if you defeat them, you can get a valuable item. One of the guys said that it is not so easy to deal with them, and that several people are needed for this. The general asked him what it means they will have to attack together. The new guy asked Mulan what precious objects she managed to see last time. Mulan said that in that game, their team got as many as 3 valuable objects. The first item was a pair of boots in which you not only rush at full speed, but also do not get tired of it. Wow, it sounds incredible. It will be great if we find all the allies and get some of the right items, the boy said very enthusiastically. The general clearly stated that when Mulan finished dinner, they would gradually move out, but Mulan was surprised and asked that they really didn't want to rest at least a little. Another figure is broken. Our masked guy continued to find and break every single piece all night. He thought that he was not fast enough yet. A guy is shown in front of us kneeling in front of the general of the red team. A real loser general told him that everyone present heard his story. But you will have to prove its truthfulness with your own strength. The guys had already set out to search. The guy turned to the general. He said that the general's shoes were similar to the magic shoes that Mulan told them about. Who would have thought that in 1,000 years our descendants would invent something so incredible, he added. The general answered with a smile that in his world there are still many devices that would surprise you, and he hopes that they will have a chance to get out of there, that he showed them everything. The new player was delighted and replied that after the game, they would definitely look into his era. But Mulan interrupted him with words about how this uncle rides furiously, and could he be calmer? The uncle laughed and replied that he learned such driving from the jints. It's no wonder that she was not used to this. And she added that in her time, only northern foreigners rode like that. They finally noticed a stone on the road, but on this stone it was written Xuan Wu Pool. This is a fork, since here is Xuan Wu Pool and there is probably a monster further away. The guy asked the general which way they would go, and that he thought that the narrow path led to the monster. The general would like to find out what the monsters are, but he is afraid that they will only waste time. After all, searching for figures is a priority for them right now. General, your magic shoes allow you to move faster like the Flash, and you can only ride a horse. Mulan will saddle it. Go and look for stones, said the guy. Mulan was surprised and asked him that he himself decided to go fight monsters. They can be weak, but suddenly he needs a partner. But he made it clear that if he runs away, especially since he is an advisor. The general just started to say that he thought it would be better, but the advisor interrupted him and assured him that there was no need to worry about him at all. I may not be an outstanding warrior, but I can honestly assess my capabilities, the advisor told him. The general agreed, but they agreed that they should all return before sunrise. The guy was happy and they shook hands. They ran around. Mulan went with the general. She asked him that since this uncle wrote a lot of TZ, is he as famous as the Hermit of the Blue Lotus? The general could definitely say that his CI was more difficult to learn by heart than Li Bo's poems. The advisor pulled out his sword with a smile. Looking at it for a short time, he said that we are going to fight again, old friend. While the guy in the mask was galloping, he galloped to a dense forest and thought that there was the best place to set up an ambush and then attack. But if the enemy had already taken refuge here, then he was in greater danger. He noticed another stone statue ahead and rushed, pushing his sword forward towards it in order to destroy another statue of the enemy. He almost did it, but they shot at him sharply from the side as he expected there was an ambush, but he was able to dodge the arrow. He turned around and again saw Macha in front of him, who threatened to land him on the moon right there. Macha shouted to him that he must accept his death, a dumb warrior. Macha came at him with a spear, but he was able to dodge this attack when suddenly he was shot from behind with a bow.
He repelled this attack too, to which Macha said that they could easily dodge a spear from a hidden arrow.
He thought that the archer was probably sitting somewhere high, and he was right. There was an archer hiding on one of the tree branches. The archer saw that he dodged. Without hesitation, he fired 2 arrows at the guy. One of them went straight into his hand, but he didn't even twitch. The guy in the mask thought that he needed to quickly finish with these 2. He rushed forward, but Ma Chao rushed after him, not allowing him to leave. He believed that he was no worse than him in horse riding. The guy almost reached the statue to break it, but the archer shot 3 more arrows and hit him. But this seriously angered him. He was too brave or crazy. His eyes burned as brightly as never before. He furiously exclaimed that he would break the statue, and with all his strength launched his spear into it. The spear hit the target exactly and blew off the statue's head, to which Ma Chao rushed after him, shouting that he should not take his head off for this. The last thing the guy in the mask said was, "Take my head if you can," and rushed on. The red team's pawn cracked. He was able to. Mulan saw that the red team's pawn had cracked and immediately told the general about it. Adding that it was probably the work of that guy in the mask, the general told her that they also need to speed up. The advisor continued to wander through the swamp he reached, but he didn't find anything. He didn't know how he would justify himself to his comrades later. Then he suddenly heard some sound in the water, and believing that it was the monster who threw the sword there, he was so happy that he defeated the monster. He was so happy, but when he took the sword out of the water, he realized that it was an ordinary frog. He began to tell her that don't be offended. If she had croaked a couple more times, he would not have taken her for a monster. Although everything is correct, a long time ago there was a shop with a thatched roof here. Turning behind the bridge I found it, he thought, remembering fragments of his poem. An unknown man with white eyes and a couple times larger than even the Regent appeared behind him. It turned out that during this time the guys found another statue, but it was much larger than the ones the general had seen before. Mulan suggested that her size could influence the fact that he would be a very strong warrior and he needed to be awakened as soon as possible. The general readily agreed with this. He activated the statue, but it turned out that it was not a bishop but a rook. He thought that first they should meet the bishop. But that's fine too. At that moment, Mulan realized that it was probably she who had confused all the roads, but they had been winding for so long that she felt very ashamed. The statue woke up and sharply raised its sword into the air right above Zhou Xian's head. Mulan was incredibly scared and shouted at him. The statue was ready to kill him. The advisor, wandering through the swamp, turned around sharply and saw behind him that man who looked like Genghis Khan and was scared. That man looked intimidating and greeted the advisor in Mongolian. Then he realized that a Mongol was standing in front of him. He greeted him and said that he was glad to meet him, but the advisor clearly did not appreciate this. The advisor was very dissatisfied and said that he did not understand a word of what the man was muttering, but he was wondering if he knew Zherzhensky. The advisor pointed a sword at him with a question from Word, whether he was in the camp, and told him to name the name and piece for which he was playing. This angered the man. He told him there was no need to specifically speak to him in the Yurkin language. He speaks it calmly, and also understands Chinese, but simply cannot speak it. The advisor answered him that he was an interesting Mongol. Just tell me, since when did the Mongols have such high-quality armor, and also have such a luxurious sword in their hands? Judging by him, he is the leader of the Mongol horde. The Mongol explained that this precious sword was given to him by the Great Khan after they united the devastated Mongol settlements. The man turned out to be not just a Mongol, but a commander who fought with the Jin Mukhali Empire. The advisor apologized for his tactlessness, but he had not heard of such a commander, but since he said his name, he would say his own. The advisor was a warrior of the Song dynasty, Shin Chiji. The Mongol commander was amazed that this was the same famous Shin Chiji. Mukhali's passed. Now we see the place where he lived and how everything happened. Mukhali approached the Khan, who had just doused himself with water and told him that he had just taken off his armor, and such frost could harm him, and handed him a towel. Mukhali asked for Borjigin Temujin take care of his health. He told Mukhali that we had gone hiking so many times, but he had never felt such exhaustion. Mukhali continued to say that may the heavens favor the Great Khan, so that he can live long and not feel tired. The Great Khan turned dissatisfied to Mukhali, and asked when he managed to learn to speak Jin. Mukhali apologized to the Great Khan. The Great Khan began to talk about how the attack on Zhongdivi had failed, and he had to negotiate with Jin Sami, and then retreat and return to the steppes. The Great Khan said that Guo Baoyo proposed to unite with the south and destroy the Jin people, but this seemed wrong to Mukhali. Mukhali added that the Song people were never famous for honesty, and Guo Baoyu was one of them, and why did Han decide to listen to his advice? "And you are a real loser who said that people from Song Lagoon, even in the wolf pack there are weaklings," answered Khan. They watched the hawk that freely soared above their heads, because among hundreds of birds there is a hawk. The warrior Yue Fei may be from the Song, but he is the most valiant among the valiant. The great Khan said that he would really like there to be more such heroes among the commanders. Muhali said that unless the sun and other valiant warriors, weak people raise a hero, but Khan said that he was mistaken. 60 years ago, the Song people had another warrior under the will of Yue Fei. When he was 21 years old, he fought against the Jing Kings, led an army of more than 50 people, and captured a rebel camp of several tens of thousands of people. Then he took service seriously and founded the famous army of flying tigers. He could prove himself like that. It's a pity that the Song state was not interested in seizing territory at that time and only wanted what they had. In his declining years, the commander came to the emperor of the Song state and said that it was necessary to compare the Jin state to the ground. And the Song, threatening him with his glorious name, scared off the aggressively pressing Jin people. Muhali asked, "But if the Song state had such a great commander, why has it now fallen into such decline?" The Khan laughed because even if the state had at least 10 Yue Fei, the rule of the stupid emperor would turn everything around and lead the country to destruction. Since the Song state had such heroes, it is necessary to reflect on their proposal, Muhali said. Shinkeji smiled and said it was such an honor. Am I really that famous? Muhali looked down on him and said that before he thought that his shoulders were wide and his head was huge like a cauldron, but it turned out he was just a sun brat. He continued that they were enemies, he should just cut off his head. The advisor looked at him ironically and added that don't look down on the Song warriors. If you underestimate them, you'll soon go back to the great Khan. The man had already pointed his sword at the advisor, threatening that he would take his sword as an offering to his Khan and was ready to attack. The advisor laughed, but suddenly something jumped out of the water behind him. They were both scared, and the man did not understand what had happened at all. A huge snake with huge fangs crawled out of the water. The advisor almost forgot that he came here to fight this creature. Muhali hit this creature on the head with all his might, shouting for it to die, and this temporarily slowed it down. He turned to the advisor and asked if there was anyone else here, and what kind of animal it was. In front of them, this creature suddenly emerges from the water, but it already has many heads and looks even more terrifying. Muhali looked at this monster with horror, and did not know whether he could defeat him. He very much doubted that such a simple person as he was capable of such a thing. The advisor fell into the mouth of this monster by inserting a sword into its mouth. Muhali was defeated that he was still alive. He thought that the advisor was really worth something. Having pierced the suit of a huge snake, he was able to temporarily immobilize it, and at this time another monster almost crushed our Muhali. He could either run away or stay here and kill her. The guy was still in the mouth of this snake, and understood that one bite from this snake and he would already be in the next world, and did not know how to defeat it. He heard an explosion and did not understand how it happened, but he felt gunpowder. This greatly changed the situation because it helped him cope. The guy and the snakes fell into the water. As soon as he emerged, he immediately asked the warrior about the gunpowder bomb. And so it turned out he really used a gunpowder bomb, but he still had 2 more. The boy told him that he was different from the Mongols he had seen, and his fighting abilities and equipment were much better. The advisor was interested in how they would divide the valuable item they would receive after defeating the monster. But the warrior didn't care much about this. He muttered at the advisor that he was ungrateful, and happiness didn't lie in getting out alive. Was this subject really that important? He suggested the idea of fighting and defeating the monster, and then they would fight and the winner would take the item. There was a monster in front of them, and not even one, but they fearlessly rushed at him. At this time, Zhou Xian was almost killed by the statue. It struck a sword near him, but he managed to jump away. The guy tried to resist her and fight, but he didn't do it well. The statue only got angrier from this. Mulan watched what was happening, but then suddenly rushed forward to protect and help her general. He didn't understand what was happening, and began asking Mulan if she had seen something like this last time. But unfortunately, she didn't know what it was and came across it for the first time in her life. Maybe it's a fake statue? Since nothing is clear, you need to figure it out first and then think, the boy said. Mulan abruptly jumped up from her horse and hit the statue on the neck with all her strength with her blade, but it turned out to be too strong and only managed to scratch it slightly. The general gave her the idea to aim straight at the head because he noticed that it was not so strong. He himself was able to knock the statue to the ground so that Mulan could deal with it and cut off its head. Mulan took the chance and slammed her katana straight into the statue's head with all her might. After Mulan pierced this thing with her sword, a bright green light began to emerge from it and began to push it away. As a result, there was an explosion of pure energy that threw our heroine several meters away. She couldn't even imagine how huge an impact this power would have on her. But suddenly some hand appears on Our Lady's hand and saves her from a terrible fall. She is clearly glad to see her partner. He is interested in whether the girl has any injuries. They were both glad that they could join the game again, but they understood that while the statue was active, they would not be able to win. Suddenly, the silhouette of a huge guy begins to appear from the fog, like Yujiro Hanma from the anime Baki. But this time, this dude was activated by someone else. The boy asks Mulan if she knows the voice this guy makes. He seems very familiar to her, but she cannot find out who he is. Finally, a huge guy appears who looked like a walking mountain of muscles from the Middle Ages. The boy cannot understand who is actually standing in front of him and asks Mulan about this guy, but she herself is not sure for sure. But there can no longer be any doubt because this is the ruler of Western Chu, Xiang Yu. They looked around and saw many different seals around them. The pumped-up guy was shocked because his opponent managed to make so many chess pieces in such a short time. On the other hand, their team remains in the minority, and it is not profitable for them to produce so few chess pieces. Besides the general, they have 2 more horses that are lagging behind each other. Such a situation will definitely not be winning for them. The boy says that Xiang Yu is just an excellent partner who has a lot of experience. With such a guy, they can definitely win. But Mulan thinks that this guy should be able to cooperate. A pumped-up dude approaches them and wants to find out which of them is the general. The guy was a little shocked by him, but introduced himself anyway. He said that his name is Zhou Xiang and he is from 2130. In this game, he plays the role of a general, after which the boy extends his hand to him. Xiang Yu was pleasantly surprised because after a long time, someone finally decided to invite him to a handshake competition. He gladly accepted such a challenge and practically broke our guy's hand. Mulan immediately remembers the concept of competition and asks that their rivalry not become the reason for the disintegration of their squad. But Xiang Yu was not going to just let go of our boy's hand and continued to squeeze it harder and harder. Jusang tries to explain to this stupid jock that he did not intend to start a competition with him, but just wanted to shake hands to show his kindness and friendliness. But as always, this guy doesn't have enough brains to understand basic things, and he thinks that the guy just wants to confuse his brains to win the competition. After which he begins to squeeze the muscles on his arm even more, which makes Juxiang's whole body begins to hurt. We need to quickly figure out how to calm this guy down. He just can't believe the strength of this guy because even through his armor, he's squeezing his hand so hard that he feels pain. He of course heard the legends that tell about that. Xiang Yu is able to drag a huge stone over his head, but he could not believe that he would ever face such a force in reality. The reason our boy can still endure such terrible pain is because he is wearing biological armor, but even so, he still experiences terrible feelings. This armor is a symbol of the latest advances in technology and serves to increase their survivability on more dangerous missions, as well as turning them into the nightmare of all criminals. These suits not only significantly increase their speed and jump height, but also increase their physical strength and endurance. The gripping force in such armor can reach up to 500 kilograms, which can help in various situations. But even with all his protection, the boy experienced simply hellish pain in his hand, as if this man did not take into account science and the laws of physics. In the face of a person like Xiang Yu, science or something like that doesn't matter at all. But even with all his strength, Zhou Xiang was taught not to show his fear, especially in front of such powerful beings. If he can't get along with Xiang Now Yuyem, then they will not be able to complete the game, and therefore Mulan asks the boy to use all his strength to defeat him. He asks for forgiveness from his master, and suddenly an electric current begins to emanate from his gloves. Xiang Yu was a little surprised that this boy still had some aces up his sleeve, but it still wouldn't be enough to defeat him. He decides to express his respect because he has not met such worthy opponents for a long time. Apparently their general is not such a weakling as he seems at first glance. At this point, their little competition can be considered over, and they can unclench their hands, but the boy's hand was clearly damaged. Xiang Yu decides that since they are all in the same camp, they should completely trust each other and fight shoulder to shoulder. Our guys also agree that they must stick together, because this is the only way to defeat the guys from the enemy camps. They finally started to think rationally, but only the boy understood that if this guy had squeezed his hand a little harder, his hand would have ceased to function. Suddenly, Xiang Yu reports that since night has fallen, a certain magical force has decided to block the path for both camps. At the moment, they have little opportunity to gather enough warriors to defend their camp. He orders the boy to go and gather as many of his people as possible, because there is no need to attack the enemy now. As soon as dawn comes, Xiang Yu will simply go and finish them all off, but Zhou Xiang tells him not to do this because it is wrong. Of course, he understands that Xiang Yu is endowed with simply superhuman super strength in this world, but even so, he must understand that many people in this game are famous generals and martial artists. He tries to explain to him that this battle is like chess, and that only brute force does not always play a role here. But Mulan can no longer tolerate this, because this is not the first time when they try to explain such things to a jock. In his defense, Xiang Yu says that last time he was too aggressive and lost control of himself, but this time he will definitely cope with his strength. He makes an evil smile and says that from now on, he will never underestimate his opponent again. No matter how strange it was, this game helped him understand that in this world there are still many strong enemies with whom he is eager to fight. But still, the boy wants him to listen to his advice. But if these words don't mean anything to him, he won't repeat them twice. But he just puts his hand on his shoulder and tells Zhou to Xiang took better care of himself while the healthy guy was out hunting. Since this guy cannot be convinced and cannot be defeated in a fight, the guy can only hope that Xiang Yu can defeat them all alone and finish the game. In parting, he simply smiles sweetly and says that he would like to see the young general after everything is over. After which he simply turns around and leaves, leaving our heroes alone. But they too should not just stand in one place, because now they can take advantage of the situation very profitably. The action takes place on the battlefield where many soldiers fought against huge snakes. Suddenly one of them decided to attack a huge turtle, but what was his surprise when he was able to leave her only a small scratch? Is her skin really that strong? But suddenly they tell him that this idiot shouldn't risk his life just like that. He'd better find the weak point of this creature and hit it as hard as possible. While that guy was giving advice, a huge snake managed to hit him, so he better watch his battle and not look at others. Suddenly the turtle got very angry and decided to attack these guys. It was so huge that it was impossible to dodge its attack. He orders his soldiers to find her weak point as soon as possible, and then take out their thunder bombs and aim straight at this area, the only way they can win. Suddenly they notice that one of the soldiers managed to survive and is now on the back of this turtle. It seems this is a great chance to find its weak point. He just smiles and says that no matter how strong her shell is, inside she remains only the most ordinary turtle of simply enormous size. He decides that the weakness of this creature is the head, and that first he needs to chop it off a little with his sword. Suddenly he performs Tenjiro's move Kamado from the blade of the demon cleaver, and says that now justice will be done. The turtle struck Mukali with a strong paw, thereby pushing him away very harshly, as if with a ram. The guy was thrown very far, but when he turned around he noticed that the turtle fell sharply to the ground, but he did not understand why. He was amazed and could not understand how he could hit the turtle so hard with just one blow. At the moment when the turtle was lying behind the ground, strange sounds were heard from her side, as if something inside her was moving and crawling out. Suddenly it's like a rider from Genshin Impact, a sword came out of her stomach. The man was shocked and shouted that Shinchiji was still alive. As soon as he got out, he shouted that it was him, but he was unpleasantly surprised by the terrible smell that was in the stomach of this huge turtle. At this moment, Muhali quickly reacted, stood up and threw something to Chiji, shouting to catch it and throw it straight into the stomach of this vile monster. Chiji caught it and laughed, saying that he just crawled out of the belly of this monster, and Mukali wants him to go back down into her stomach. He threw the bomb right where he came from, and when it went off, the turtle was finally defeated. The guys stood and watched as it died. Muhali, watching this, thought that it seems that with the blessing of some divine power, they, mortals, can defeat here seemingly invincible monsters like a turtle. A bright light appeared out of nowhere. At that moment, Muhali noticed that Chiji was still alive. The guy stood leaning on his sword, and Mukali screamed in surprise that Chiji survived. Chiji, still leaning on the sword, wiped his face and added with a grin that even if Mukali died, he would still survive. The long-awaited prize appeared in the sky. The chest emitted an unreal amount of light and gradually sank to the ground. When the chest fell to the ground, Mukali still didn't really understand and asked the guy if this was the same chest that they were supposed to get after defeating the monster. Chiji became furious after hearing that they had to share the prize. He began shouting that it was his treasure. He rushed forward to be the first to snatch the chest, saying that he had just nearly blown himself up and the treasures should be his. But he was a little late. While he was running to the chest, the guy threw one of the grenades at his feet. Mohali laughed looking at this picture and said that he would blow it up with his noise grenade. Chiji immediately turned around and began to run away from this bomb, and Mukali with a grin told him to jump into the water if he didn't want to get burned. In the end, the guy did just that. While the frightened Chiji lay in the water, Mukali quietly took the chest and slowly began to run away with it in his hands. At one point, he finally noticed that something was wrong, but it was already starting to be too late. He realized that the grenade had not exploded for too long, and when he turned around, he saw that Mukali was running away with the chest. He shouted something after him, but the only thing he heard in response was a reproach that he was not satisfied and that this battle was being fought with the brain. The guy rushed after him to take the chest, shouting that this Mongolian dude had chosen the easy way, to run rather than fight. While the Mongolian guy was running away, he thought that the first thing he had to do was take the treasures from the enemy camp, and the second thing was to destroy that same enemy camp. An unknown guy from the enemy team told him that treasure is the key to victory. They are not afraid to fight and bring it as soon as they get it. He had been hit hard by a turtle recently, and perhaps now his internal organs were damaged. He probably wouldn't even be able to fight due to his condition. But the guy remembered that only by winning this game would he be able to return and see his Khan again and meet his family. Chiji shouted after him that he did not know that all Mongols are such weaklings. All the Khan's subordinates are as weak as he is. Without turning his head, the man told him that he could say whatever he wanted about him, but don't dare talk about his family. The advisor began to understand that this was true, and this guy couldn't stand it, and it looked like he was a devoted servant of the Khan. But with a grin, he decided to say that he had touched on his sore subject, but allegedly did not want to say it. Mukali became furious and answered him that their people are the most spineless, and not one of their nation has the right to mention their great Khan. They stood opposite each other, and the colleague said that he was never afraid of anyone if he had to quarrel with someone, but Mukali replied that Mongol warriors cannot be like their nation. Mahali said that during the reign of Jing Kong, the Jin people attacked them and not only sat on their heads but also shit on them. They also captured both of their rulers and decided to hold a sheep-bringing ceremony. And princesses, queen mothers, and all the daughters of royal families were desecrated and turned into military prostitutes. Mohali shouted to the advisor that, experiencing such shame, the Song people could really coexist with the Jin kingdom and take sides. He continued that this is why, compared to the Jin people, he hates the Song people even more, because they are all weaklings to him. The advisor inserted his speech that what Mohali said was enough, and he knew the shame of Jinka from childhood, and he does not need to repeat it again. He didn't stop there. He continued to say that Mukali should not look down on them, because sometimes he himself looks down on his own country. And recovery is his long-standing desire, but no matter how hard he tries, his life has already become and will be in vain. For a long time, the guy thought about his grandfather's last wish, and even more time he regretted that he could not help him fulfill his dream. The bearded dude recognizes this guy and says that he is just a great warrior, but even if he can win this game, nothing will change for him. But he says that everything is completely different. If he won this game, he would be able to make his deepest wish, and he would want to never return to the dynasty sun. It's not that he didn't try hard enough for his goal. On the contrary, this guy did a lot to make his dream come true. He spoke out for the northern expedition many times, but as a result, he only became a laughingstock for his comrades and the entire court. That is why many government officials decided to organize an attack on the guy. They believed that he was some kind of alien who did not understand anything about government affairs. Gradually, even government officials stopped tolerating him, and the situation reached a critical situation. He wants with all his heart to restore the honor and glory of the dynasty song, but unfortunately, even with such enormous power, this cannot be done. When this guy was young, perhaps these problems did not bother him so much, but now everything is different. In such cases, the bearded dude decides to ask the question why he simply cannot find a quiet place where he can wait for the game to end. He says that he had a conversation with his brother Xiang, and he told him everything about this era. In fact, when he spoke to him, he didn't say anything special. But these words greatly inspired him. It was the usual Chinese wisdom about birds and people. But after the guy with the weird pigtail heard this, his jaw practically fell off his head. Now this guy is completely confident that one day his actions will be studied by descendants in the history of China. This is exactly what he wants to achieve. The bearded dude understands that now this guy, it is no longer possible to stop. He tried to warn him, but he did not listen. Let him not regret it now. He offers throw away your magical artifacts for a while and fight hand-to-hand like real ones gigachads. This is exactly what that guy with the pigtail wanted, and then he exposes katana and is preparing to go into battle. He admits that our boy is indeed the leader among the dynasty Sin. This will make it even more pleasant for him to cut off his head. After which they begin to run at each other, screaming and wanting to chop off each other's heads. The guy with the strange pigtail says that he won't even give him such an opportunity, and will simply kill him with his sword. The narrator tells us that a battle has just begun between two great generals that lasted for several decades. The swings of their swords were simply incredible, and everyone tried to defeat their enemy, but the guy with the beard tried to be more cunning than his opponent. But unfortunately, he failed to make his attack. The guy with the pigtail started grinning like a real devil, and then tried on his secret technique. At one point, the dude finds himself underneath his opponent, thereby leaving him with a swing of his sword. He was simply shocked that his opponent dared to use such a vile technique against him. This act was unworthy of a true warrior. He turns to him and just starts screaming that our guy is a real liar, and he won't let him get away with this just like that. This guy's ability is that he is able to return to one specific moment in time that he has already experienced. This is a very convenient skill for fighting the enemy. Suddenly, he turns to his enemy and begins to laugh loudly at him. He so wanted to use this ability against him. Now their battle has become much more interesting for him. The bearded dude is not going to just tolerate these ridicules and decides to start attacking again, saying that he will teach this freak a lesson. But he just continues to smile and says that it seems that he is not welcome here and promises to return to his treasure as soon as possible. A green aura begins to appear around him, and after he laughs again, he promises that they will meet again one day. The bearded dude had almost reached this guy with his sword, but just a second was not enough and he managed to teleport. He gets angry and shows his grin. Since that guy promised that they would meet one day, he makes a promise to himself to cut off his head no matter the cost. Suddenly, in the middle of the forest, a portal to hell from Minecraft began to open through which our guy appeared. He thinks that this ability is incredibly convenient because he can be anywhere. He teleported to his general. His ability turned out to be really convenient. He turned and suddenly a knife flew at him. He jumped in surprise because he didn't expect this, but he was able to dodge. He mistakenly thought that it could be that this ability could accidentally transport him to the enemy camp. A strange man with a sword rushed at him, saying that he did not understand what the advisor meant. The advisor bravely stood in front of him without even being afraid and told him that, "Let's see which one is faster, your sword or my sword." The captain abruptly intervened in their battle and grabbed the advisor's sword by the blade, and with the other hand repelled the attack of the strange man. Chiji was very happy because once he saw the captain, it means that he successfully teleported. The captain turned to the guy and said that he was glad to see him again, but judging by the way he looked in the video, he had been through a lot and the battle was fierce. That man threw down his weapon in fear and said that, "Commander, you really caught my knife with your hand and remained unharmed." The general embarrassedly tried to explain that it was just his nanosuit blocking him, but it would still be very painful to attack him with a knife, and the advisor did not understand who this rude guy was, and in any case could not say that it was the general. Suddenly Mulan approaches them and grabs him by the ear, saying that the guys don't even know whether this is one of yours or not, so you just attack. Mulan attacked him that it was in vain that he considered himself the strongest commander of the Han dynasty, and the man, laughing and jokingly asked to spare him, and that he did not dare. Chiji was amazed that the man was Fan, a general of the Han Emperor Liu Bang. The man exclaimed happily as Mulan continued to hold his ear that he was famous. We were taken back to that man's past and shown how in rainy weather a man sits on the floor, but in front of him a man is almost lying on his knees. "With Xiang Yu, you are a noble who looks down on others. What is so cool about this guy?" told him. The man answered him irritably that, "How dare you make my older brother wait so long for your uncle and nephews?" The guy sitting behind replied so that he does not destroy the great achievements of Peigong. Peigong has a broad outlook, and now that they have something to ask for, what does it matter? He asked Peigong what this meant, but he answered 100. Obviously he is older than him, but he puts on a strange look and refuses to see him. What is the point of both of them opposing Chin? His brother, that same strange dude, laughed and said that he thought the same, but he on his knees said that if that nephew refused to come, then let him bring him here by force and take his ancestors with him. The fat guy said that from the first time he saw Master Xiao, he figured out his brilliant plan, but the second guy told him to just listen to Peigong and do everything he says. All said that this guy is a real hero who is able to lift cauldrons, but it seems that they were mistaken. In fact, they came to him to borrow troops. This guy watched the quarrel between two guys. One of them said that the words of the second could not hurt him in any way, and he asked to be as fierce with him as before. Well, everyone started laughing because this idiot's grandfather was a great warrior who rose to the rank of general, and he doesn't even look like an ordinary warrior. Perhaps he was picked up by mistake on the street. In general, they said that he is the adopted grandson of his grandfather, and he is not worthy to be called his grandson. They say that they won't hold a grudge if they refuse to provide troops, but they ask for understanding, and for people to come into their situation. Unfortunately, they don't let him finish, and someone from the crowd decides to throw a throwing dagger at him. This dude turns on the reaction of a real ninja, and the village of the Hidden Leaf, and with one blow knocks the flying sword straight into the ground. It's simply incredible that he managed to react so quickly. His fat partner was in complete shock and just stood there in a stupor, not understanding what was happening. It's good that his friend managed to react because he definitely didn't need an extra wound. He just sat on the ground and looked at the stuck blade, not understanding what the hell was happening here. Meanwhile, these two said that Xiang Yu is a real creature who dared to attack them like a rat, but now they will show the reason why his grandfather was named General. Guards immediately came to the defense of their commander and said that if they came even one step closer, they would be forced to start a battle. But our guys were not going to retreat after such disrespectful rudeness. But the guards failed to show a worthy rebuff, and each of them was defeated with one blow. Our guys are too cool to waste their strength on some static characters. Another guy with a pigtail comes up to him and asks him to let go of the past and stop chasing him. He declares that this time they will borrow troops and leave here as winners, but the second guy simply does not understand what he means. Another fat man flies into the house and starts yelling for his grandfather to get the hell out of here. They won't tolerate him anymore and will fight back. But this old man turns out to be too cool a dude. So cool that he doesn't even come out of the shadows and says that he will definitely teach his grandchildren how to be real warriors and good people. The fat man cannot stand all this pathos and, out of anger, decides to simply use brute force to try to break through his perfect defense. But we all understand perfectly well that this rash decision will not lead to good things. Meanwhile, the old man was so relaxed that he did not even open his eyes to such a weak opponent, but in fact he was accumulating energy in order to defeat his grandson with one blow. In a friend, he opens his eyes and two Sharingans from the anime Naruto appear there. It seems the grandfather is a big fan and wants to defeat his grandson like that. The fat man didn't immediately understand what the hell had just happened. Maybe his grandfather wasn't a human at all, but his strength was simply incredible. After an epic burst of thunder, we watch as this fat guy just flies out of the scrap area like a cannonball while his comrades watch the spectacle. As a result, the guy still lands far from a soft landing. He breaks through the ground with his body, and it is simply impossible to believe that a person with such strength can exist. The crowd began to worry about their comrade and ran to help him, but each of them still thought that in front of them was a super powerful grandfather whom they could not defeat. As a friend, he hears his opponent turn to him and say that he has never heard his name before, but rumors about his strength manage to reach him. Oh, the huge guy is Xiang Yu, and the old man next to him is Fan Zheng. They know that they are talking about that this guy is the reincarnation of the son of the great Red Emperor who was a powerful warrior. But the pumped-up guy was disappointed with what he saw before his eyes. It seemed to him that a person who bears such a name should have great strength, but he sees in front of him only an ordinary weakling. In another, the dude simply kneels in front of him and begins to beg for the Major General's forgiveness. He asks not to blame his people for daring to object to him. This is all due to the weak discipline of their army. We are shown a beautiful view, and the action is transferred to a mountainous region of China called the Central Plain. In the main office, there were many workers sitting watching what was happening in virtual reality, and one of them began to yawn loudly and say that he wanted to sleep. Apparently, he was completely bored with the process that was happening in the game, and he tried to somehow cheer himself up. Came up to him from behind and told him not to be lazy. At that very second, his back became perfectly straight, and his eyes focused on the monitor. The girl was too pleased with herself because she scared the guy, but she immediately apologized for it. Since dawn will come in an hour in the game, it will be necessary to remove the protective barrier, and the workers immediately began to carry out the order. This guy was simply shocked because he had already met this guy in previous rounds, but he could not have expected that he would fight with him on the same side in the final round. The guy in the background was shocked that now he too can fly like an Iron Man. The funny thing is that everyone on the team except him is capable of flying. Loser. Has a very logical question. If they managed to win the last battle, then why the hell are they still in this game? The girl says that they managed to finish off this idiot in the last round. This clearly upset him, and he asked that little sister Lan not trample his face in the dirt so much. Oh, I saw with my own eyes how Xiang Yu grabbed him and then strangled him. The sight was clearly not a pleasant one. But these words didn't almost frighten the guy, but on the contrary inspired him. He knew that the ruler of Western Chu deserved his reputation, and this made him want to meet him even more. Sister Lan saw that the big guy was trembling with fear, and decided to ask about the last battle, but he was frightened and said that it was just a terrible sight. He wouldn't want to meet this guy again. Has only 3 people in his life whom he fears more than anything in the world. These are his wife, his general, and also another mysterious character. And Xiang Yu is the most powerful of all his enemies who have ever been in his entire life. His brother once said that even if he were an emperor with an army of thousands, he would still continue to be bothered by dreams about his worst enemy. Xiang Yu is like a nightmare that will haunt him for the rest of his life. The guy always appreciated him for his incredible courage. Not every warrior can have such qualities, only those who were chosen by God himself. The opportunity to exist with him in the same era allowed him to know what it was like to live with a half-god on the same earth. But from his strength, he began to realize his own weakness. If they meet him as enemies, they will most likely lose. But if they can fight side by side, then they will win 100%. The girl also saw his abilities and thought that with him, their chances of winning would increase. The guy with the pigtail has even lit up his eyes from such a tempting idea. He can't wait to go and free as many chess pieces as possible as soon as possible. To the guy who looks like a robot, it seems that he is the only one who understands the seriousness of the situation, because they have not yet met the master and do not know what to expect. The girl tries to defuse the situation a little and says that now they can relax a little because they recently received a very powerful amulet that will help them in their adventures. But the guy with the pigtail asks this RoboCop to relax in the place where they are going. There will be no overlord, and so he can breathe out calmly. Having looked at the huge column, the guy notices that the enemy team has already managed to unlock 2 cannons the crap needs to get ahead of them. He was already desperate because, looking at the difference in their strengths, it seemed that their team was doomed to defeat. Has almost arrived, and the barrier that guarded the territory is gradually disappearing, which means that enemies will be able to easily get into this region. That pumped-up guy came to the bridge on purpose because this is the only way here. He wondered who would be his next opponent. At a friend, he heard the sounds of an approaching horse and met his first guest to date. He wondered who this rider would turn out to be, a friend or an enemy. Guy in the demonic mask comes as close as possible and says that he will be a friend for this jock. But the guy already understood this a long time ago because he recognized the horse that was in their camp. The strange thing is that this guy smiles all the time, but now he sees his comrade after a difficult battle. He was pretty beaten up and he remains absolutely calm. Action moves to other guys who found an interesting statue. According to the hieroglyph on it, General Shu rests here, which means that they can have an excellent partner for the team. In a friend, these 2 idiots simultaneously call the name Guan Yunchang, and the guy behind him doesn't understand why the hell they're talking at the same time. He decides to ask Mrs. Mulan about this man, and she says that the dynasty to which he belongs is much more extensive than he thinks. This lady was of very high status. In such cases, they order Xiangs to activate a new partner for them as soon as possible. Meanwhile, the pumped-up dude decided to help his comrade and cure his wounds. He notices a strange appearance and now begins to understand why he has to wear a mask of a frightening ghost. He only says that his partner did a great job, and now he is moving forward for larger prey, and the rider can sit here for now and gain strength before the next battle. While he was crossing the bridge, he only thought about battles and the fact that some enemy generals might be waiting for him on the other side of the bridge. He is always haunted by a strange feeling that someone is looking at him intently, as if a pair of eyes do not take their gaze off him for a second. About that part, he turns out to be right, because in the bushes one could really see eyes similar to Gojo Satoru. For some reason, that guy thought that he could defeat the jock with a sudden shot, but he simply caught this arrow without even turning around. He only says that if the guy dared to shoot an arrow at him at such a distance, then he really considers him an ordinary person, but he just points his finger at him and asks this daredevil to come out of his hiding place. This guy's name is Xiang Yu, and he was simply shocked that this guy was able to discover his location so easily. Instead of retreating, this guy decides it would be a great idea to fire a couple more arrows. Apparently, he hasn't yet realized that it doesn't work against a jock, you fool. While he was shooting arrows at him, he knocked them off and rushed towards him with great speed. Yan Yuji, while taking out the arrows, was a little confused by the understanding that this guy could easily deflect an arrow with just one hand, even if the distance there was not at all great. He jumped to the other side because he began to understand that periodically he would have to change position while shooting. Arrows flew from different directions at the pumped-up guy, but he just as skillfully jumped past and fought them off. One of the arrows passed right near his neck, almost hitting him. At the same time, he realized that the closer the shooter gets to the other side, the faster his arrows become. The trajectory of his arrows became more understandable for the jock. He moves while shooting, and each of his arrows hits exactly in the center, right at him. He was shocked because no one in his time had such shooting skills. Skipping all the arrows, he smiled at the thought that this guy is one of those masters whom you rarely see in a century. Yuji suddenly jumped out from behind a tree and shot an arrow. This arrow was very accurate. He could not deflect it and put his hand up. The arrow went straight into his hand. Almost time to get to the other side. That man was furious, so much so that his eyes burned with red fire. He was ready to skin the shooter. In the era of cold steel, when there were no long-range weapons such as muskets, bows, and arrows were the most feared and deadly weapons. Bows and arrows have always been given an indispensable and important weapon on the battlefield. The story of borrowing arrows from straw boats reflects the importance of bows and arrows in war. There have been many famous archers in Chinese history, and almost every dynasty had famous generals who were famous for their archery skills. Yang Yuji was the leader among these famous generals. Such hints as infiltrating Yan 100 steps, suppressing a rebellion with 3 arrows, and shooting an arrow into a stone were associated with him. Among them is Obenziana Tiao Gong Hao is even more interesting. One day the king of Chu was playing in the garden, and there was a white monkey there. He ordered those who were good at archery to shoot him. Several arrows were fired, and the white monkey caught them and laughed. King Chu ordered Yang Yuji, who was standing next to him, to shoot. The monkey felt something when Yuji was told to shoot it, and he reached for the bow. The boy tensely took the bow in his hands and prepared to shoot at the white monkey. But for some reason, the white monkey was so frightened that he even pressed himself against a tree nearby and began to tremble. Yang Yuji just got into the archery pose, and the monkey was already scared. Scare the sun monkey and let him go. This is a famous allusion to the phrase tune the bow, so as to shout at the monkey and make the monkey cry in vain. But now there are people who, even knowing how strong the archer is, are not afraid of him. That man rushed forward even more excited from the realization of how much stronger his opponent was. The archer continued to shoot arrows, and one of them flew past his ear, scratching him severely, which forced him to slow down a little. The arrows continued to fly at him at high speed, but he covered himself with his hands, causing several arrows to pierce his hands. This angered and intrigued him even more. He spread his arms so that the arrows flew off and continued to run further. He ran without even looking back and without stopping even from arrows. He was like an immortal. The arrows pierced his legs, but even this did not stop him. He rushed forward headlong like mad, regardless of the arrows. He didn't understand what it was and why now the arrows weren't flying at him. Did he really not want to kill him anymore? But one of the arrows hit the chain that holds the bridge and it began to crack. He began to understand that the shooter had changed his tactics and, instead of killing him, decided to destroy the bridge with him. And from behind the bushes, an archer could be seen. He was tense and pulling another arrow. His arrow hit exactly the cable holding the bridge and it split. The bridge began to crack at the seams. The bridge began to fall. The jock who remained on the bridge was afraid, realizing that the iron cable had broken and he was about to fall into the abyss. He began to fall, but managed to grab another cable and remain hanging on one cable while the other part of the bridge had already collapsed. Yuji was amazed at his opponent's durability and fired a couple more arrows at him. But the jock, even hanging on one rope, was still able to catch and deflect the arrows that the archer fired. He was furious about this. He was ready to grind the archer into powder because he was like an annoying bug with his arrows. The shooter, taking aim, thought that he could still persist in this situation, and it was better to let him fall, because even if he didn't die, he would at least become disabled. He shot and hit the second cable. It began to crack, and there was a feeling that it was about to break and the bridge would collapse. The jock realized that he was aiming at the second cable in order to break it like the first, so that it would collapse along with him. The shooter pulled out a second arrow and took aim, continuing to entertain the idea that that man was cool, a real hero, and it would be great if he weren't an enemy. That pumped-up man held onto the chain with his hands and realized that if he didn't resist, he would definitely lose and he had to take a risk. He jumped and suddenly jumped onto the rope as if preparing for something. The shooter was even more amazed and angry at his persistence and thinking that he should be defeated no matter what, pulled another arrow. His arrow flew straight to the target. It hit the second cable, which caused it to collapse in the same way as the first. The man jumped and broke away from the cable at the exact moment when the arrow hit him and he began to collapse. He suddenly took off and flew into the air like a bird, heading to the other side of the bridge towards the archer. Idiot, look at how things are going for you there, he thought while he was flying all the way. 3 more arrows flew towards him, and this time he was able to fight off only 2, and one hit him right in the head, which knocked him down completely, and yet he fell down. Yuji was immensely happy that finally, after so much time and martyrs, he was still able to win. He walked to the edge to enjoy his triumph, and thought that it was strange, didn't he die after such a fall? But not a single figure on the opposite side was broken, and this is very strange because people usually don't survive after something like this. He looked down in disbelief because if you fall from such a height, it's either death or disability, nothing else, he's not immortal. Suddenly a hand comes out of this cliff, as if from a movie Samar's Call. That jock turned out to be alive. Our shooter jumped back sharply and fell from shock and fear because he did not expect this. He didn't understand how this was possible, that he was climbing to get to the top, or how he even managed to do it. The pumped-up man still survived and got out. He still had those same arrows on him. He said that if he loses the first battle, how will he explain this to his general? He was furious, his eyes burned with fire, his pupils became double, and the fact that he almost lost the first battle drove him crazy. The shooter turned pale with horror, especially after he saw that he had double pupils. In 564 AD, the Northern Zhou army launched a massive offensive against Luoyang. Luoyang was attacked for more than 30 days, but still held out. Yuan's guards from the Northern Zhou dynasty blocked the road from Heiyang to Luoyang. Then he joined the army. Rui attacked the city with all his forces and Luoyang was in danger. However, the Northern Zhou dynasty armies believed that they were outnumbered, and Qi dynasty reinforcements would not dare to rashly come to the rescue, so they only stationed reconnaissance troops around the village. The soldiers rushed around the fortress and tried to repel the attack. They cannot allow them to attack, and if the city is destroyed, they will die. Everyone is in a panic. One of the soldiers asks the man in front why reinforcements have not arrived to them today. He answered irritably that there was no need for such a rush, and that if they held on, reinforcements would come sooner or later. He said this simply to stabilize the morale of the army, but he himself was very scared. So, who will dare to come to the rescue at the risk of their lives? One man in the chariot was calmly drinking at that moment, and declared that Luoyang was almost captured and today they would get it. A soldier ran up to him with news that the army had discovered a small number of enemy troops on Chu Mountain and asked him to make a decision. The general said that it seems that reinforcements have arrived, and they are sending troops to surround Qiushani. The soldiers began to panic even more and told the man, higher in rank, that another group of cavalry was approaching from afar. It seemed to them all that this city was most likely impossible to defend. A couple more people were moving towards them. One of them addressed the other as the fourth master, saying that there were many enemies, but there were few of them, and how they were going to fight this battle. The fourth master just mumbled something about being an idiot, and that's all. The troops are divided into 3 groups whose goal is to undermine the morale of the enemy, the opposing army. The soldiers standing in front of the entire platoon shouted to the others to rush forward to the city of Jinpu. But the soldiers were absolutely not serious, and one of them told the other that he had heard that the girls in Luoyang were very energetic. But then suddenly someone threw a weapon at them which wounded one of the soldiers, and others started panicking that there were enemy troops ahead. One of them told the other to look to the left, because the enemy troops were already approaching. While they were rushing towards the opponents, someone from the squad asked whether this was the only option or not, but he was told that no. But just look at the leader. Their leader looked like either a monster or an evil spirit in a mask. Regardless of who he is or who he is, he was told to kill them and receive a reward. The guy in the mask, who looked like an evil spirit, turned out to be incredibly strong and agile. He smashed a couple of people from the enemy squad with great speed. Everyone was scared and tried to run away thinking that he was truly an evil ghost or spirit because of his abilities. One of the soldiers at the fortress said that it looked like reinforcements had arrived, but he was told that if it was reinforcements, how could so few people give? The generals who are defending the city, please let the archers cover them and send troops to fight with them. But the others had little faith in it. One of them asked why he should believe him, and maybe they managed to pretend to be their reinforcements and trick them into opening the city gates. Then open your eyes and see clearly who I am, said the guy in the mask, taking it off. The guys who were guarding the passage to the fortress were shocked that they could not defeat their opponent. At this rate, they would simply break through their defenses and it would all be over. They asked to pay attention to the lady who was riding on a horse. It was the king of Lanking herself who arrived on the battlefield. Both guys were incredibly happy because reinforcements had finally arrived and their chances of winning had increased significantly. Suddenly, several warriors with swords like real rats attack her from behind, knowing that they cannot honestly defeat this warrior. The dude just starts yelling for the fourth master to be careful and look around because he's about to be killed. But those warriors fail, and in an instant they are pierced by a hail of arrows. But who managed to make such a quick attack? The girl can only turn around and see the soldiers on the floor, who were already practically lying unconscious. The dude, seeing all this, orders his soldiers to open the gates and quickly leave the fortress to finish off the rest of the enemy troops. And here the real battle for life and defeat begins, because 2 armies collided in a fierce battle that should show us the winner. It is immediately clear that the rivals did not expect such a turn of events. The reinforcements turned out to be too strong, and they could not cope with so many strong warriors. We are also shown the head of one of the leaders of the enemy squad, and his squad was shocked that he was defeated so easily. But what kind of creature could do it? Suddenly, a crowd appears in the distance. Led by a character already familiar to us, his mere appearance instills fear in the hearts of the enemies. Yes, it turns out that this is the same guy in a demonic mask who was completely riddled with arrows a few chapters ago. As you can see now, he is completely fine. The enemy squad was so horrified when they saw such an opponent. They thought that the devil himself had come for their souls so that they would pay for all the sins they had committed in their pathetic lives. The only thing they could think of was to simply start running away from the battlefield. One of the leaders saw how his warrior was simply running away from the battlefield and wanted to order him to return to duty. But of course he did not hear him. The fear in the face of the demonic warrior was much stronger. And the guy couldn't understand what the hell was going on here. He just looked and counted the number of soldiers he had just lost, and those who were simply running away in fear. He is informed that the enemy's reinforcements number at least 600 people, and almost all of them are celestial masters. But this is not the most important thing. They broke their confidence in victory, and the enemy's morale is as high as ever. The rest of the warriors could not understand their teammates. Why the hell these cowards were running away from the battlefield, because they should stick together in the face of danger. Looking at the King of Lanking, he understands that at the moment he cannot defeat him, and therefore swears to himself that one day he will meet him and send him to the next world. We are shown that in 564 AD, Gao Chunggong led an army of 500 people and stopped the invaders who attacked his fortress. In the end, he was forced to leave the camp, but there were countless fallen warriors and weapons that they had to sacrifice to save them. From the fact that an entire battle was stopped under the leadership of this guy, his reputation immediately rose to the skies, and people began to call him the hero and savior of this city. This means that the king named Lanling can finally take his rightful place on the throne. Suddenly, we are shown how the same guy is sitting under a tree, and his physical condition clearly leaves much to be desired. A fat guy and his girlfriend come up to him, and the fat guy can't understand why this guy looks more feminine than the others, and she stood and admired his beauty. Suddenly, a guy in armor comes up to them from behind and tells his friends to move away from the guy a little. He needs to sit and rest for a while, and it's better not to distract him at such a moment. Looking at him, he was only glad because the numerous wounds from arrows on his body had finally begun to go away. Over time, he would be completely healed and would re-enter the battle. Madame simply continued to stand and admire the beauty of this guy. Not only was he beautiful in his face, but he also had a very slender figure that any girl dreams of. Suddenly, a guy who looks like a small armored gnome comes up to him and says that the bridge through which they will have to pass is already broken, and they will need to look for a workaround. The boy is clearly shocked by such terrible news, and immediately begins to think that Xiang Yu did this so that they would not reach their destination. Meanwhile, we are shown an archer who is diligently running away through the forest from his pursuer. It seems that the battle was not an easy one. He simply ran behind the nearest tree to catch his breath, but fear in the face of his opponent was clearly visible on his face. Panic gradually began to take over, and he tried to calm himself down. He believed that there was no enemy that could not be defeated, and that he still had a chance to win. Meanwhile, in the real world, people in the laboratory continued to observe what was happening inside the game and the gameplay. The guy with the strange mustache says that another warrior was discovered in the green sector who was not there before. Also, another phase was activated on that huge stone, and he communicates this information to that same beautiful lady. She even thought about the fact that this guy from the game is simply incredible, because despite the fact that he is participating in the game for the first time, he shows an incredible result and becomes a leader among his team. Suddenly, this dude notices that Xiang Yu is going to fight with Yang Yuji. He definitely can't miss such a spectacle, and is practically taking out popcorn to enjoy the spectacle. Unfortunately, their battle is moving to the summer, and they don't have enough cameras there to watch them. They need to urgently come up with something. You can't miss such a breathtaking spectacle. The madam in cool glasses tells them to immediately send portable cameras to that territory, and not miss a single collision. The entire development team immediately obeys her order. She just epically takes off her glasses like some villain from a movie, and coolly says that we'll definitely see how this game ends. Meanwhile, our huge guy wandered through the forest in order to finally find his victim, but so far he has not been able to do this. He tried his best to concentrate his gaze between the trees in order to find this damn guy. Suddenly, they show us how this idiot decided to attack him from under the gun, but we all understand perfectly well that this will end exactly the same as last time. Instead of dodging this blow, the guy simply grabs this arrow as if he doesn't care at all that they just wanted to kill him. This turns out to be an unusual arrow and a rod. He understands that after their battle moved into flattering territory, this guy began to adapt to his surroundings much better. He's starting to remind me of Hanma Yujiro from the anime Baki. He also has exactly the same crazy smile after he meets a strong enough opponent. And our shooter decided to slightly change his location and run to a more distant part of the forest, collecting various sticks along the way that he would use as arrows. He simply runs around this guy in a circle and tries to become more invisible to him like a ninja, after which he throws at him the very sticks he collected along the way. No matter how surprising it was, the jock calmly dodges, but this time one of the sticks still touches him and even leaves him a wound from which grape juice begins to flow. He just starts bragging about the fact that he grew up in the harsh mountains and is actually just great at hunting animals of various origins. This guy will never defeat him. Suddenly, the mustachioed guy says that no matter how strong his enemy is, for him he will forever remain prey, and therefore he can play a little with his victim. After which, with another sharp movement, he begins his marathon through the forest in the hope of finding some way to defeat this monster. He goes out into a more open space but wants to return to the trees in order to hide from the huge guy. But suddenly his red eyes open and he realizes that the jock used the power of chess pieces. It was simply incredible. A strange aura began to appear around the archer, and the sensations from it were simply terrible. He tried to understand this strange power, but could not understand what the hell was happening here.